Hello and welcome to our webinar on how to support emotional well-being of children affected by the pandemic. So this webinar concentrates more on the support for secondary school students. We have also created some content and some webinars for supporting those in early years and then also those in primary school. So the content is very similar across those three areas, but there are some slight differences. So please feel free to have a look at those as well, although most of the content is quite similar. So if I begin by just explaining a little bit more about what the plan is for today. First, we'll take some consideration about how adolescents and young adults have been affected during the pandemic, quite generally. Think about how we might support the emotional well-being of adolescents. Consideration of how we might support them in their return to school or college and what impacts there might be on their well-being in doing so. And then also to think a little bit about how loss and bereavement is affected, has been affected by the pandemic, so more widely. And then finally we'll end with how we support each other during this time. So to begin with, I've got a few pieces of research here, so some recent and some historically, but also relevant. So in a very wide-spanning interview of adolescents, it was discovered by Hall and Land that social isolation is significantly associated with higher depressive scores, with lower self-esteem scores, with an increase of suicide attempts regardless of gender, so there's no difference. Family connectedness was found to be a protective factor for both boys and girls, but that's only for social isolation and suicide attempts. And for boys, academic achievement and school connectedness were also found to be protective factors for social isolation and suicide attempts. That's very specific to boys. And there were some gender differences in protective factors around suicidal attempts. So family connectedness was found to be the only protective factor for girls, whilst family connectedness, academic achievement and school connectedness all were a protective influence for boys, which might seem a bit kind of go against some of the research that's already out there, that boys actually place a lot of, especially during isolation, a lot of weight in their well-being based on how well they're achieving during their academically. So on their return to school, that might be a focus of theirs, is to kind of get back into the swing of it, get back into where they were, and make sure that they're doing well, and that they're level with where they should be. So you might find a real push from them, and maybe some frustration when they might not quite get there. It's interesting though that family connectedness for both boys and girls is very important. So it's important to consider how the lockdown's been and how the parents and siblings have influenced the well-being of students on their return. So neither family connectedness, academic achievement or school connectedness demonstrated a significant influence on self-esteem or depression. So that was regardless of gender. So a lot of the kind of the supportive things, kind of influential factors, were more on suicide attempts than they were just about more self-esteem. Okay, more recently, so Lodes et al., they did a very quick systematic review of many studies, 63 studies, which has a very large population of young people interviewed. And there's a clear association between loneliness and mental health problems in children and adolescents. So it is a big predictor of future mental health problems up to 9 years in the future. And it was strongly associated with depression. and the length of loneliness. So the period, if you think about how we are now, the period where they might have been away from school and friends, family, is a big predictor of mental health problems in the future. And where children have been in forced isolation or quarantine, they are 5 times more likely to require mental health service input. And this is based on previous pandemics across the world. And so this would suggest that current social distancing measures, I know that we are kind of in one of the lower tiers here in Suffolk, but in other areas. So this is likely to have an increase on depression and anxiety as well. And there might also be some elements of post-traumatic stress, not necessarily just with those directly affected by contracting the virus or those family members that contracted the virus. Again, more recently, so an interview with over 500 early adolescents, so kind of the year 7, year 8s, sleep deprivation was found to be a significant a moderator between the relation between isolation and generalized anxiety, social anxiety and depressive symptoms, but not between social isolation and separation anxiety. So that means that it's sleep has an impact on just general anxiety feelings, and that could be, the lack of sleep puts us in a very delicate position in how we might cope. If we're not sleeping properly, then we are, potentially more, we might struggle during the daytimes, but not necessarily on the separation, which a lot of young people when they return to school might be exhibiting. So there was a conclusion that a longer sleep duration might be a protective factor. Adolescents do generally sleep more, but with the lockdown, sleeping patterns might have changed, and so they might not have been getting all of the rest that their body needs in order to process and to cope, with the day ahead of them. So daytime sleepiness was also found to be moderate the relationship between social isolation and symptoms of depression only, and that daytime sleepiness, which can quite often go in conjunction with poor nighttime sleep, is a sort of specific risk factor for depression for early adolescents. So being tired during the day. So Kooth, I don't know if people are familiar with Kooth. It's an online service for young people. They did based on the young people that were contacting them, they've noticed a 34% increase in demand for mental health support. That there has been quite a dramatic increase in family argument issues. So if we think about the family connectedness that was mentioned in a previous piece of research, that is a big factor. That there's been a very big rise in sadness and depression issues reported. There has also been, sadly, an increase in domestic violence during this period of time. Loneliness as well during in the isolation period has been a big factor. Sleep problems, it's a big jump. There's been a small but significant increase in suicidal thoughts, increase in eating difficulties during this time. Again, that could be down to the fact that routines have really changed during this time for a lot of families. Alongside that goes a big increase in health anxiety, not just with COVID symptoms, but also with other, where people have been on lockdown and unable to do the things that they would normally do, to exercise, and along with that goes health anxiety. And there's also been a small but significant display of an increase in psychotic symptoms. So if we think about how young people might be acting differently during this time, we've all gone through a period of universal loss. So this is not just the fact that we are seeing a very large number of deaths linked to COVID-19, but loss of structure in our lives, going through a period where school and work has been very much disrupted, and alongside that, not being able to meet with family or with friends, or even to go to those, attend those places that we would normally go to that help our mental health. So, sports clubs, gyms, cinemas, even restaurants, all of those things. Children, young people might be demonstrating higher anxiety, not necessarily just a health anxiety, but just more generalized anxiety of how they might cope. Are they behind on their schoolwork? Are they behind in their friendships? These things have all been impacted upon. We've been through a long period of a loss of support or social interaction. So the support is not necessarily just support from school, but support from extended family, and even from services as well. So where mental health services haven't been able to do direct face-to-face work, or young carers, we here at the hospice have also had to limit the amount of face-to-face contacts. We've tried, made measures in order to do online work, but still, there's been across services and school, there's been a loss of some of that support. For many, this is a big period of transition for a lot of people. So having to change the way we work, change the way we learn, change the way we teach. But then also, we've got students that might be coming up from primary into secondary school, which is already a period of transition. And then also those that have done their GCSEs and going into college, and not going through the normal process, the normal transition of completing exams or finishing their GCSEs. And it's an unusual time. And where there are unfamiliar circumstances, there can be a period, it can create novel responses. And by that we mean there might be students that you had already noted prior to lockdown that might have been struggling in school, and that they might have reacted in a certain way. They might have been quite aggressive, they might have been kind of quite withdrawn. But with everything that's going on, they might come back with kind of different behaviours. Those that were withdrawn might be coming back more outwardly expressing their feelings, and vice versa. And those students that you might have felt that were quite well adjusted and coping well in school might be coming back with different reactions to how things have been. So think about how we support families, vulnerable families during this time, Paul. So families more generally. School often acts as a hub for social interaction and for that feeling of community. So when we've had a long period of distancing, there's also been a feeling of loss of support. There's potential that some children might not be returning to school in the same way that they were. They might have changed schools. They might have chosen to stay at home. So this could either be for their choice, or as things go forward, there might be further restrictions put in place because of the spread of the virus. We are uncertain about that. So where there are children, young people that are choosing to not return to school, or in a limited way, it's important to check on vulnerable families and follow any safeguarding policies that you have in place. So checking in with them can be as simple as a telephone call, or a visit even, and just checking that they get what they need in order to facilitate that return to school and for them to feel supported to do so. It's important to remember that all children have an element of vulnerability during this time, but there needs to be extra care taken to those families that might have had pre-existing vulnerabilities. So those that might have been had a history of domestic violence, they might be isolated from their supportive networks during this time, and that because of some of the changes in the working environment, they might have already had pre-existing financial difficulty, but that could have been exacerbated by the furloughing scheme or redundancies, and those kinds of things in the parents' side, even in young people as well, having lost their jobs. Retail has been massively affected, as have the hospitality sector, which a lot of young people do work in. And then also to consider those that might have been recently or historically bereaved, going through a period where there has been, we're more exposed to death and dying than we have been in previous decades, more recent ones. That can be quite triggering for many young people. So, historical bereavements might be brought back to the surface. So, as part of supporting children, we need to consider how we support the parents as well. So, it's generally a good idea to contact parents, and not just those where children might be struggling, but also more generally, how are parents getting on, and talk about their experience of the lockdown. The lockdown has had, evidence shows that the lockdown has had significant impacts on adults' mental well-being, parents' ability to feel that they are being as supportive as they can to their children, with their own kind of pre-existing things as well, and also to ask how they feel about the children returning to school. If it's been a period where parents have felt much closer or to their children, or they feel that relationships have been very different during this time, so they might have really enjoyed the lockdown, they might feel quite remorseful that children are returning to school. But equally, where things might have been a bit more tense, there might be a great sense of relief of the tension as children return. So part of helping parents to feel supported is also helping them to understand how you are keeping their children safe whilst they are at school. So explaining any measures that have been put in place in terms of cleanliness, routine. I know a lot of schools have had staged returns to school, that certain age groups or year groups, or children with certain surnames, initial-wise, that might return in a staggered way each day, but then also any routes and things like that that have put in place. Also to have a discussion with parents about how they've communicated with their children about the lockdown, how they've helped their children to understand, or what questions have been raised, what language has been used even, so that you can use similar terms that are familiar to the young people, and so kind of continue that on in school. And also help parents how to be, so all of these measures previously, all these points of discussion are there to help parents feel more at ease, so that they can then be more receptive to their children's needs. So it's about being what they call as a secure base. If you can support the parent to understand their own needs, they are more able to be there on an emotional level, and to have space to process how they can help their children better. So when thinking about the return to school in particular, so talking with the children about how their break has been and how that's felt for the family. So you've already got some information from the parents, hopefully, and how the young people have spent their time. So consideration of, is home a safe place? And we're not necessarily just talking here about domestic violence or anything like that, but just that they, have they had their own private space at home where, particularly in families where they've been shielding, where they've got a space that's their own and that is away from everybody else, so they can process things. Have there been lots of people in the home? Not so many. Has it been a very loud house, or has it been quite quiet? There might be the potential, particularly in blended families where people have got step siblings, they might not have seen family for a long time, I know things like WhatsApp and Zoom are really useful, but that's quite often not an adequate substitution for actually being in the presence of other people, and not necessarily just and it's not been possible to have the tactile comfort that normally we would have, but just to be in the presence makes a real difference. And there's also the question of, what if some siblings have returned to school and others haven't? That can create tension in the house. It can also create worry that if there are, particularly those that might be at home and their sibling have gone to school, they might worry about them, or there might be some annoyance and frustration that it's not fair that a brother or sister gets to stay at home and they have to return. So just asking the young people how they felt about that. This has also been a period where parents might have had to explain death, dying, or serious illness to young people at an earlier age than they might have felt comfortable about. They might not have felt that they did it well. The young people might not feel they've done it well, and they might return to school with further questions, or they certainly might be talking about it more, obviously, because the virus continues to be a part of our life, and there is still some level of anxiety about contracting it as we go forward, and the long-term symptoms that can go along with it. So we've also had a period of this, like I said before, the universal or community loss. So the young people might have had someone in their own family die or had the illness, but they might know of somebody that lived in their street, or is the friend of a friend, or worked in their local shop, that has been seriously ill, or may have even died from the illness. And that means that we're all much closer to the seriousness of it, and that the virus continues to spread even so now, and so that's likely to be a continuing thing. And with the period of the 24-hour media and social media as well, we did have the daily briefings for a long time, and they've now gone down to, I think it's probably weekly briefings as we stand now. That means that young people have been potentially closer to what is frightening information for many, particularly with social media. Sometimes there's obviously things like fake news. I know there was a big thing around 5G towers and some misconceptions. And social media quite often is where adolescents would go for information rather than watching the news on the television. But being witness to or hearing of the daily death toll, or the spread of the virus, or the reports of how challenging it is to monitor and control the spread of the infection, might lead to a greater health anxiety for young people on their return to school. So how you might support a young person on their return, so in more kind of general emotional well-being ways, just having the clarity on the schedule and structure of the school week and the exams as they go forward. Not exams, the lessons. Can just make them feel in a much more better place, and then giving them some space as part of their week to process the changes in the school structure and what impact that might have on their emotional well-being, on their relationships with other students. Are they separated from others that they might have been friends with, or that they're not able to now see their younger siblings or older siblings in school, and what impact that might be having on them. Spending some time to dispel some of the health anxiety, the kind of the mistruths around the virus. So helping them to understand a little bit more about how things like the R number works, or how virus is spread, the importance of hand cleaning and why we do it. So by understanding the situation that's in front of them, young people might feel much more in control. It certainly might reduce any of the anxieties that have come from the fake news that can be out there, or the gossip even. So just general emotional well-being stuff, just giving them some education on anxiety. So those things like what anxiety is, or, what the root cause of it. So it being a rush of adrenaline, and that this is, a perfectly natural chemical in our body. But with anxiety, it's a misfire. Helping them to understand that adrenaline doesn't stay in our system for very long, and also, things that they can do to help reduce that. So breathing techniques, kind of mindfulness, restructuring their thinking, or challenging some of those thoughts in a productive way when they are having a spike of anxiety, if they are, and having that in place. And then also not just a space to talk about the physical, the health anxiety, but also any anxiety they might have had during the time of not being in school, um, and the loss of education during this time. Mostly, I think it was something like 60 or 70% of teens, and then also adults as well, felt that they were adequately, well supported by their schools, both emotionally and educationally, during the lockdown. You might find that children are returning at different stages in their learning. So, some might have spent a lot of time studying and committing to their work, and others might have had changes to their routine, not done as much, and therefore, a bit of an imbalance on the return as to where people are. So more generally, talking about anxiety, doing things like grounding techniques. So again, this is based in mindfulness. Being able to, if they are feeling anxious, to think about their surroundings. Even go to a separate space where they can sit and just take a moment to then settle their thoughts. There's a thing called finger breathing, where what you would do is trace your finger around your opposite hand. So as you go up your thumb to breathe in, and then pause, and then on the downward stroke, breathe out, and then again up, pause, down the finger, out again. There's a wonderful video on YouTube by Pookie Knightsmith. I would suggest, if you wanted to learn more about finger breathing, please do have a look at that. It's a very useful technique because we're always with our hands, obviously. So being able to do that breathing exercise, and once you've done that, to pause, consider how you might feel, and if you need to do it again, to go back. It's good. It's a good exercise in the fact that it helps to teach young people to control their breathing, and by doing that, helps them to refocus. Okay. It's important as part of the school week to have regular breaks and physical exercise. So that can really help with anxiety by kind of running out some of those feelings, and stretching and getting the fresh air is really important. And like I mentioned earlier, if you can have a dedicated space for young people to have, they're struggling to have some time to have a timeout. So that could be in your student support area, obviously with appropriate social distance measures put in, but just making sure there's a member of staff there as well, just to kind of support young people if they do need to have a timeout. Maybe even some of those resources, around how to reduce anxiety, mindfulness, when they are there, they can use some of those techniques as well. So if we just move on to thinking about how losses or how bereavement is different during this time, for a lot of young people, families, adults, the losses may feel very much more sudden, and whether they're directly caused by COVID-19, so that the progression of the illness can be very fast at times, but it could also be where illnesses haven't been treated because of fears of contracting the virus. So if you think of the example of maybe an adult or an older relative that might have not wanted to go to the hospital with chest pains because they felt that they might contract the virus from attending a clinic or a hospital, and by not having it checked, it could have had significant health difficulties going forward, and they might have died from those, so a heart attack maybe. There's also been the impact of where appointments have been reduced or treatment stopped for a period because of resources being funneled into supporting the COVID response in hospital. And then subsequently, that means from any disease progression might have progressed. If you're thinking about cancer treatments in particular, has been listed in the news recently as being a big factor that's been affected. Also, losses may feel more sudden because of the lack of contact with family members who might be approaching the end of their life. Young people and families might not have noticed that steady decline. They might have had reduced contact because of not being, in online meetings or face-to-face, but also because of restrictions that have been put in place by hospitals in terms of visiting, or even the hospice itself. We had to put limits in as well. So not seeing that might mean that the loss might feel more sudden. So like I said, that visitation has been affected, and that might mean that some young people have not had the opportunity to have those final moments with a loved one, to say goodbye even before they have passed away. Funerals have also been very different during this time. When the pandemic first started, funerals were very much limited down to less than 8 people per funeral. But then going forward, that's been expanded back up to 30, which is still quite a small number when you think about some of the families we might be supporting. Funerals can have hundreds of people, depending on culture and geographic location, even people being around with their extended families close. Many funeral directors have moved towards having online resource as well. So where families haven't been able to attend, that the funeral is live streamed on the internet with passwords in place, so that people can still witness the process. And during this time, because of the supportive networks have been reduced, school quite often offers a supportive network of staff and pastoral, educational staff and pastoral staff that are there to listen to a young person's story, to help them go through that process of grieving. It can also be a big distraction for young people. It does have a lot of, obviously, the structure of school itself, having to get up, helps young people to have a structure around their day, and to have periods where they are able to reflect on the loss, but then also have periods where they can focus on something else and take their mind away. And so with the social distancing as well, they might not have been able to have contact with their extended families or their friends with the social distancing, which has been, these are quite often the places we might go for additional support or to feel comforted, and particularly tactile comfort has been very much reduced during this time. There's also potentially an element of what they call disenfranchised grief, where someone has died, and that parents might be reacting in one particular way, and that the young people might feel a different way. So, parents might be very outwardly emotional, whereas the children might not feel that they're comfortable to feel that way, or there might even be very much differences between siblings or family members. A lot of how we grieve is influenced by the people we're around. So if we're not seeing our extended family, then that will have an impact on us, because young people model grieving behaviour. So this idea of disenfranchised grief is to who has the permission to grieve, and in what way. So it's about where families might, those around us might be not allowing young people, not purposefully, but just in how they've reacted to a loss. And again, this is particularly influenced by the fact that we might not have seen family members as much. The people that have passed away. And so, are we allowed to grieve for after having a period of not seeing them? We might have already started to have gone through that process before they even died. So just thinking a little bit more about generally how adolescents understand death and dying. Their understanding being very much more on the adult side. They do understand that the concept of death is permanent. There might be some feeling of injustice or the justice of death. So, there's quite often this thing of where they might blame physicians, doctors for not offering the care, and then because someone has died because of not having treatment. The changes of adolescence more generally, hormonal changes, can have an impact on how strong a reaction is. With the hormones, there might be very big ups and downs. If we're honest, a lot of that is for girls and boys, but where girls might be menstruating, even that has an impact on how they're able to manage their mood or how vulnerable they might feel at certain times. Peer reactions are very important. So this is a period where young people might turn to friends rather than parents for support. And so if the reactions of peers are maybe not felt to be supportive, if it's kind of shrugged off or not responded to, or where young people might distance themselves from somebody that's grieving because they don't know how to react, that can make things much more challenging. Like I say, as they're in this period of they've got sort of one foot in childhood, but then also one foot in adulthood, there can be this feeling of wanting to intellectualize a loss and want to just kind of dismiss some of that feeling as a way of coping, and just be quite realistic about the nature of death and that it's inevitable. But then also at times might have some regressive behaviour where they might act out a little bit more, disturbances to sleep, or watching, acting in a much more childish way, and also being at their kind of intellectual level and their understanding of the world, that they have a better understanding of their own mortality. So when somebody dies, they're much more aware of that this is something that they could also die from. So in how they might react to a loss, there can be some real diversity in the response. So the teen years can often be a time where we might isolate ourselves in our rooms, but this can become much more exacerbated as we with a loss, and they can be much more withdrawn, low in mood. And equally with, like we mentioned earlier, with some of the bodily changes, there can be this great need to outwardly express, and that can come out as anger and hostility. They may reject the support of adults, again in preference for the support of peers. They might be reluctant to discuss the issues. They might hide some of their fears and worries with jokes, sarcasm, as a way of dispelling that feeling, just kind of keeping it away, keeping that distance, and kind of making a joke of it in some respects as a means of coping. And like I mentioned, there could be that diversity of, they might regress one foot in childhood, or become very much independent in that much more wanting to present in that adult way. There might be a greater increase of risk-taking activities. So that could be alcohol use, that could be sexual contact, that could also be with self-harming behaviours, or putting themselves at risk by going on to building sites, or starting fights with people that they know that they can't, that aren't an equal challenge. So putting themselves at risk. And they might need some guidance with coping with grief. So helping them to understand that what they're going through is normal, and that having that diversity of feeling is perfectly normal as well. There might be days where they feel really happy, as much as there are days where they feel sad, and that's okay. So thinking about how we might support children, I'm not sure if you can see this clearly, but if I kind of go through this, this is a model that's been put out there by the National Bereavement Alliance and the Children Bereavement Network. And at this bottom tier here, so the most amount of young people and families, what they need is to fulfill those basic needs. You know, have they eaten? Have they slept well? Are they stimulated? You know, are they getting the tactile comfort that they need and the feeling of safety? You know, and if you can support that, then they're much better at coping with whatever the world throws at them, including bereavement. Then the next, you know, there might, as we kind of go up that pyramid, you know, there might be a large number of people that might need some support in saying goodbye and rituals. So, you know, those things where funerals have been affected, that they might need some support in setting up their own ways of saying goodbye are really important as a way of coping, and that could be on an individual basis, or it could be you know, as a class activity or a school activity. So then, you know, a smaller number of people might need some information about you know, some psychoeducation on what's normal in grief, and just generally a supportive response from existing supportive networks. So, you know, the school, if they've already had support from external agencies, you know, be they social workers or, you know, local mental health services, that they're generally, they just need a bit of additional kind of contact and just, you know, acknowledgement of how that young person might be feeling on an individual basis, based on what's happened. And then a smaller group of people might need to have a bit more additional support around the family following a loss. So, so rather than just the normal everyday where you would acknowledge a loss with a young person, you might want to set something up in school. You know, they might have an internal referral to any pastoral support you have in place, or, you know, just kind of stepping up and just, you know, maybe just a small piece of kind of time limited work, or just being able to help them to focus their thoughts maybe on some individual kind of remembrance activities, or supporting their general emotional well-being. And then that top tier there, so this is kind of a very few number of families that would need specialist support. So that would be people like ourselves here in the 565 service at the hospice. So we're a children's service here for bereavement, where, you know, so families here at this point, it might be where there's kind of complicated issues around the loss. So, and where behaviour might be kind of beyond the norm of what you would expect of a normal grieving process, where some of the behaviour is extended, which I think I'll go on to now, actually. I'll copy that in a moment. So generally, what can you do in school that would help? Like we said, if you think about that pyramid model, most children can go through the grieving process with the support of friends, family, and, you know, the staff at school, just acknowledging the loss and kind of helping them to talk about it. So the support you would put in place is similar to what you do to adults, so kind of talking therapies, or, you know, art therapies if you want to, or, you know, just being able to talk about it and having a space to talk about it, but adapted to the child's developmental age. So, you know, for example, you know, where we've said that some young people might be a bit more aggressive, that might be where you want to do some more kind of art-based things as a way of expressing if they've not got the words. Wherever you're offering support to a child, or, you know, siblings even, ideally you want to give the support to the parent as well, be that just with some kind of psychoeducation on what to expect in grief, or helping them to find some individual support for themselves. Or as a family unit, it's important to recognise that time away from a grieving family can be just as important as time grieving within that family. Again, this is where the structure of school can be really supportive, And then also to follow the lead in any child, follow the lead of the child in any work you do. So, not setting up any support very abruptly saying, well, we're here to talk about, tell me about the death of your dad, or those kinds of things, but just letting them know that this is a space for them to express whatever they want, and that there might be times where they want to talk about it more. There might be periods of time where they want to talk about it less, and that's okay. So there's lots of things that, and these are things that we have been recommending to families to do, but these also can be things you can do in school. So doing some of those remembrance activities, so where they might not have been able to go to funerals or to see people before they've died, to create things like memory jars and memory boxes where you would store, written or pictures in the memory jars, pictures or memories that they've written down or drawn of the person, and the good and the not so good times they might have had with them. And then in memory boxes, that is kind of extended out to objects that remind them of the person. They could make a CD of the music they used to listen to, or have items of their clothing, a scarf or a jumper, or even just a little vial of their perfume or aftershave. Can be a really good thing to include in those boxes along with pictures. I've got a range of, just a couple of books here. We do have a list of books that are useful, books and movies on our website. So My Sister Lives on the Mantelpiece. That's about how a young boy is coping with the fact that his sister died, and she's still, that parents might still be struggling with that, and how the young boy goes through that journey of kind of understanding it and getting the support he needs. A Monster Calls is kind of personifies illness and death and dying as a monster, and it's about a young boy's struggle with that. It was made into a film recently as well, so a really good book. And the rest of the story, which is about how a young person learns more about their family history from the stories that they're told by other family members. So movies, there's a kind of a range of areas here. So Coco, a Disney film about a young man who goes into the underworld on the kind of the Day of the Dead. It's a very colourful, very vibrant story, really well done. Disney's really good for kind of films around loss. So, but Coco is generally one that we recommend. The Lovely Bones, it's kind of a bit of an abstract one in that it's taken from the view of the person that's died, watching her family cope with her loss after she's been murdered. And then Extremely Loud and Extremely Close is a film that focuses on the trauma of 9/11 and kind of the more wider experiences of loss. Also features a young boy who's on the autistic spectrum. So it's an interesting take on kind of the struggles that go along with that. And two of the other things that have been really helpful, not just on bereavement, but just general emotional well-being, are things like an anger wall, where you would get a young person to draw or write down all of their feelings on a big A3 piece of paper, take it somewhere that's easily cleaned, and then you get them to concentrate all of their anger kind of up into their body, and then get them to throw pieces of clay or eggs or tomatoes even, and to get that physical, the throwing at the things that make them angry and upset can help focus a lot of that thought into a physical activity. And then things like feelings first aid kits. So it's about explaining to a young person about how a first aid kit works, for physical health, and what things do they have in their feelings first aid kit that make them feel better. So and that can be a range of things that they might choose to put written down and kept in a little envelope that what's their favorite meal, can they eat that, who do they go to for physical comfort, do they like to go to the beach to kind of as a way of distracting. And then when they're feeling low, they can then do some of these things And what you're doing is you're helping them to identify their own kind of self-soothing techniques, which is, again, a really useful thing, just more on a more general emotional well-being front. Additionally, I think this is particularly true of teens as well. The use of social media and technology is a much larger thing in this group, although not specific to them. So, being able to express in a safe way their feelings on Facebook, on Instagram, making photo journals, or memorials on these sites as well. Being able to share some of their feelings with peers, their own little communities on Snapchat or in WhatsApp groups, and what is appropriate and what's not appropriate, and how do they keep safe. There are lots of, quite surprisingly for many people, there's lots of video games out there as well. So, not necessarily your kind of your Call of Duties or those kind of more violent games, but there are some games out there that help with bereavement as a focus. So there's one called That Dragon Cancer is a really good one. There's another couple of really good ones out there as well. There's one called Brothers. So ideally you can search for these games around loss and suggest these. It's a really good avenue in the fact that it helps young people to have a lived experience, and it's more interactive to go through these. There's also lots of video logs and blogs and podcasts on grief out there as well now. There are also a lot of links to Instagram as well, and communities around grief on there too. There are some apps out there specific to grieving. So Nelson's Journey have produced one called Smiles and Tears. And what that does, it consolidates all the things that you might do in a group piece of work around memories and remembrance, and puts it on an online thing that young people can happen all the time. And there's also the opportunity for online fundraising as well. Can help with that memorialization process for many young people. The Child Bereavement Network have created support cards, which can be very useful. So where young people don't feel able to kind of verbalize how they're feeling, these are downloadable on the Bereavement Network website. And all the young people do is they tick the things that they want to say to a particular person, be that a family member, to a friend, to a member of staff at the school, or even to themselves. And they just tick those things and then hand it to the person. There's even space there to put their own suggestions on how they can feel supported. So going back to that pyramid and thinking about the top tier and when you might need to ask for support for a young person or a family, there are some kind of particular red flags. So where there's a prolonged period of sleeplessness or sleep disturbance, hypersomnia, as well as lack of sleep, where there's been a significant loss of appetite or difficulty with eating, or where difficulty in terms they might have has a large increase in those things as well. There are some really good services out there for that level of support, but just to consider whether this might be a bereavement need, where there might be social withdrawal. I know these are things that are typical of the teen years, but where it's significant, where they might be withdrawing from those supportive networks of friends even that they might have used before, or where there's significant aggressive behaviour, where it's not just being angry, it's where anger and being aggressive is the go-to response for all things. It might be a time when you need to think about getting some additional support from a specific service. So you can get advice on these areas. So there's lots of national charities. So Winston's Wish, Grief Encounter, they're two of the biggest ones for bereavement support. But then you've also got Young Minds, which is focused on more generalised mental well-being, and you can get some guidance from them. There's also, like I said, the Children Bereavement Network, which have got resources on there for families, young people, and for schools. And then if you wanted to make a specific referral to a local service, you've obviously got us here at the hospice at St Elizabeth in the 565 service. So we're able to offer support for those bereaved by progressive illness or by COVID. So you just contact us via the website. You've got Nikki's Way, which covers West Suffolk. So that's where they're able to offer much more open access work, in the fact that they also support deaths by accidents, suicides, where there might have been stillbirths, things like that. They're able to offer that support. A lot of their stuff is based around group work, whereas ours is more on a one-to-one. You've got Nelson's Journey, which is up in Norfolk. So again, they follow much more of that. They've got a blend of a blend of group work and also one-to-one, as long as they live in an NR postcode, as far as I'm aware. But please do check the website just in case any of these have changed. You've got the Stars Grief Support, so they're based over in St Helena Hospice, which is Colchester. So they cover North East Essex. And again, is a blend of, similar to us, that they offer support for those affected by progressive illness, but there's also a blend of face-to-face and groups. And then Crews in Ipswich have also got a small team of volunteer counsellors that work with children and young people. So they are a very good resource across the county that you can contact. So just before we finish today, it's important to think about how we look after ourselves during this time. You might be worried about your own safety on the return to work. And if you do have anxieties, it's important to speak to your line manager and agree a safe and appropriate way of working. So that could be reduced timetable. That could be doing some work in an element of isolation or shielding, supporting those members of staff that are on site, or that there is adequate and agreed provision of protective equipment and wash breaks in place. So conversations like these offer a reassurance to you and to line management, and that planning ahead reduces the chances of further distress or infection, even if there are things in place or you disagree with the things that are in place. And thinking about how you might be feeling emotionally, it's important to remember that it can be overwhelming to support a child living with the death of a loved one, or that might be experiencing heightened anxiety or stress due to the pandemic. But you can't take these feelings away. You can only support them through that journey. And it's important to identify things that help you to do that. So that can be things like finding a colleague or another leader to talk to about how you are feeling, just more generally. Keeping in perspective with your own life, having that balance of keeping work at work and home life separate, and that you're doing those things that help, that you've got your own kind of self-soothing techniques, that you've got your own balance of work, rest and play. You're doing those things that you like to do, and if you are finding it hard, to treat yourself in some way, and that can be lots of different things. For some people, a treat is to go on a very large run and just kind of run it out and get that feeling out. For others, it's having a spa day, and for others, it's just having that packet of biscuits that's at the back of the cupboard, or spending time with family, specifically. Recognize that you can't do this all by yourself. Asking for support when you need it, and if you're not sure when you need it, that it's before you need it, so that you've got that support already there that you can lean on, and that also structurally that you speak regularly with any line management about how your support of that child is going. That gives an opportunity for them to give input and reflection on what they might do and to help you, but also gives an opportunity for you to reflect on whether what you're doing, or you are the right person to be supporting, and maybe that needs to be done by someone else or stepped up to an external agency. So finally, it's important to remember that when someone dies, or even just the fact that we've been through this historical event of a pandemic, children's lives have changed forever. But with the right support, children can adjust, develop, and flourish, and that what we are doing as professionals can really make a difference, even though they can be very slight things. So just before we finish today, I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about the 565 service. I previously just worked generally within the emotional wellbeing team at the hospice, and we supported family members of patients in response to COVID, and that we can expect a larger number of experiences of loss and bereavement. We've expanded our criteria to supporting anyone that's been affected by progressive illness. So both living with it, but also bereaved by it, including those deaths that might have been by COVID itself. So generally, the support that we offer is face-to-face. We are trying to move towards some group work, but we're unable to deliver that at the moment. We have expanded the resources on our website so that there's content on there for children themselves if they want to access that, but also for family members and for professionals. So this webinar will be put on there as well, and we continue to keep that updated with up-to-date information where we can, and more podcasts and webinars where possible, both for professionals and for families. So like I say, we do a lot of face-to-face work, but due to the social distancing measures, that a lot of the time is more online and through telephone support. So generally for those aged between 5 and 14, we do parent and child work with, the reason for that is so that there's appropriate safeguarding policies and procedures in place. It's also useful to help parents and children to start that conversation and to support each other to some respect. And where young people are kind of over 14 and deemed to be confident to speak for themselves, and we offer them separate space away from parents, so confidential in an appropriate way. So we do, all of our work is contracted for safety. There's no charge, it's absolutely free, but it's got measures in place around appropriateness of space and time and those kinds of things. So if you did want to make a referral to the 565 service, please do give us a call. The number is Ipswich 707-999, or you can email us on emotionalwellbeing@St Elizabeth Hospice. So you're welcome to email or contact us, and then if a family doesn't reach our criteria, we can still find a place for, make an onward referral or guide them as to where they can go for additional support. So please do get in contact with any concerns that you might have. And very, very finally, I just want to put this slide up here. Obviously, you can probably imagine that we've been affected quite heavily as a hospice, funding-wise, due to the pandemic. A lot of our shops have had a period of closure. Our donations haven't been good, as good as they might have been. And a lot of our larger events have had to stop. So if you did want to support us in any way, then please do contact our fundraising team. The details are on the screen there. So the final thing for me to say is thank you very much for joining us today. I do hope that you found some of it useful, and hopefully you'll come back for some of the further webinars that we'll be producing. Thank you very much.